Hi, this is Jeff Harmon with Brilliance Within Coaching, and welcome to the new episode of Conversations That Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today, in our conversation, we are excited to welcome Rob Wright. Rob, to me, has been and is a connector and a thought leader in the life science space. He's most recently been the editor-in-chief of the Life Science Leader magazine, where over the years he has interviewed hundreds of executives in the life science space. He's written thousands of articles, including peer review articles that focus on a variety of areas in the life science space, and before held a variety of roles in different companies, commercial side of those businesses. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Rob. He has a unique perspective, being recently retired, and can have a retrospective look on leadership in the life science space. So I hope you enjoy. So thanks so much for joining us, Rob. You heard the introduction that I just did, and a place I'd love to start first off is for you to share something out of your own life that most people wouldn't know or be able to find out about you from your bio or your LinkedIn profile.
I guess one thing that I find kind of interesting, or people find kind of cool, is I was in a high school madrigal choir that toured Europe in the 80s. And, you look at it now, it just seemed like, it was a big deal. Now you look back, wow, that was really a big deal. But back when you were doing it, it was like, they do it every 4 years or whatever. And, and the places we got to sing at the Vatican and Chartres Cathedral, St. Peter's Basilica, the Eiffel Tower, that was, you can't find that on my LinkedIn.
As you look back, what was the impact of that in you for your life? I mean, at the moment, it was, you just acknowledged as a little ho-hum. But as you reflect back on that experience, what was the impact on your life? What's the footprints or the fingerprints of that experience what's that been on your life?
Well, I think I decided I wanted to be in that madrigal choir because I wanted to go on the European tour. And so I worked hard at being a pretty good singer. I would never say I was a great singer, but I worked hard enough to be good enough to get to do that. And then when you become a parent and your kids get certain opportunities or whatever, I don't remember my kids getting opportunities to necessarily tour Europe. They did some stuff in the US and things. But, it was a pretty rare opportunity, and I certainly appreciate it. I remember I sold a hell of a lot of magazines to earn the money to be able to pay for it to go. So that was the fundraiser.
Yeah.
So, and, it was like 30 some days, away from parents and home. And, I think you just, and you see the world, the world isn't as you necessarily grew up in. So it gave me a much bigger perspective on my place in the world, I think. I was very fortunate to have that experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's just in all these conversations I have with people to get these little nuggets, and LinkedIn can be very two-dimensional. Even if people spend, give it its due and spend time to flesh it out, it's very two-dimensional. So I love when we can hear these little nuggets from people's lives, like you just shared, because it just makes you human. It makes you more human than maybe just someone seeing your professionally taken profile picture on LinkedIn.
I agree.
So I'm excited for this conversation. And our first question that we always ask is just casting the title of the series, Conversations That Leaders Aren't Having. I would love to hear, what's the first thing, Rob, that comes to your mind when you hear that phrase or that title?
When you first asked me about doing this, I thought I haven't been having a whole lot of conversations with leaders per se lately. I certainly did a lot throughout my career. But lately I haven't been having those conversations. But if I reflect upon, the interviews that I had with people and my own experience of, working at different companies and my perspective of them, I don't know if they're talking enough about purpose. Having an organization that is wired towards a bigger purpose, and how do you get to that, and all these different aspects that go into creating a company culture. So that's one of the things that I'm not sure if, I know I've interviewed leaders and they say they take it seriously and so forth. But I don't know if they're taking it seriously enough. I mean, you think about purpose. So right now I'm thinking about the purpose of my father. He's in his mid-80s. He was a pediatrician, MD, PhD, very highly trained. And his purpose was caring for children. And you think that's a pretty noble purpose, to have, especially if it's going to pull you away from, 40 hours plus a week. It was probably 60, maybe 80 hours when he was really practicing and on his own. To pull you away from being able to be a father and a son and have to live in a different part of the country and all these things, there's a lot of sacrifices that one makes. And if you're going to make that for a company, it feels a lot better when you have this noble purpose that you can really get behind, and you find yourself working late, not because, you're avoiding your spouse or your kids. It's just, you get lost in the fun, and the challenge. And it feels like you just have to keep going. How do you get that?
Yeah. What gets in the way of that? From, again, you've done CEO roundtables, interviewed hundreds of leaders over your career, especially over the last 10, 11 years. What gets in the way? Again, the lip service is there, and I get it, but there's competing commitments. What's getting in the way of really leaning in and leaning in on a purpose that drives the entire organization?
Well, when you think about an organization, like when I think about creating a purpose-driven organization in life sciences, I think initially it feels like it would be so much easier. We cure cancer. We return sight. Yet there are a lot of companies that are working on those things, right? But what about other industries? Like we make jet engines. No, that's probably not their purpose. I would imagine a lot of those companies think we get you there. Coca-Cola isn't selling sugar water. They're selling refreshment, on a hot day, and nostalgia, So when I think about getting this purpose that is bigger and so forth, number one, it comes down to how do you communicate that? How do you take the essence of this really cool molecule idea, whatever it is you have, and boil it down to something that is so simple that everybody in the room can comprehend? So that requires outstanding communication skills. That requires incredible listening skills. That requires leadership. And what happens, in my opinion, is a lot of these people, when you're starting a company, you're so busy focused on starting the company, getting people, that you can't take the time to do leadership, personal development. If it says founder, president, CEO on your business card, then you should be reading books about leadership, especially if this is your first time as a CEO. You should be watching TED Talks on how to become a better communicator. You should probably have a coach, but you probably can't afford a coach right away. But at some point, you should have that. You should certainly have a mentor. A mentor, hopefully, that's maybe a chair on your board if you're in that kind of situation, and it's a good person. I mean, I just think about how many people get so busy running on the treadmill. Are they taking the time beyond just a podcast, listening to a podcast on a subway or during their commute, and then how are they engaging with their peers on that? Mm. So a leader should be working on this skill set of how can I communicate this? How can I come up with a Steve Jobs type phrase, to describe a computer that is a bicycle for the mind, to be able to describe what we're trying to do elegantly. And the only way that you can really do that is reading, reflecting, thinking. I mean, more than half of their time, in my opinion, should be spent on trying to develop themselves as a better leader. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I was talking with my wife about this last night. We were talking about some of the former leaders at organizations where she worked. And she commented how, I remember I only met this person one time, but every time this CEO saw me, they knew me by name. They remembered me by name, and they remembered something about a conversation that we had. That's a little detail. The really good CEOs need to really get all those little details right.
Now, you cast it initially as time, and that time is, that's all we have at the end of the day. But at a certain point in my experience, to do what you just described, it requires a certain level of humility. And in my experience, humility doesn't come easy. There are the rare folks who just get it, who wake up one day and they get, okay, I need to be different. Most of the time it comes through pain. Humility comes through pain. So I'm curious, you've seen CEOs and leaders throughout their life cycle, from those startup CEOs to the ones who are now just serving on different boards after being CEO of multiple companies. What is that? The trajectory of around humility that you've observed as you've had all these conversations?
Well, the really good leaders that I have met, and now if somebody wants to say, well, define good and all this kind of stuff, I'm sure I could define it as we look at their organization. Was it viable? Did they hire people? Did they get them all to appeal to market and all these different things? There's a variety of those different metrics we could look at. But I'm talking about, like, when I engage with people, I can tell who's full of themselves and who isn't, who wants to learn, who wants to help teach without making me feel stupid about it. And I often noted a lot of those leaders would say, well, Rob, you probably know this. Well, I probably didn't, but they're giving me the benefit of the doubt that, and then they teach me about it. And so I was always humbling myself before these people, because they were always, a lot smarter than me. And I would ask these wickedly stupid questions, whatever. So yes, there has to be humility, but there has to be enough chutzpah to say, I think we can do it. I think we can do it. I need to get the right people. There has to be enough humility to say, like, here's my strengths. I need to build upon them. I know these are a lot of my weaknesses. Like, I can tell you, I struggle with AIDS. That's always been a challenge for me. I need to always remind myself to work on it. So, if they humble themselves to say, this is where I'm weak, how can I fill in those gaps with, really, really good people who aren't the yes people? I mean, that's the thing. If you are a leader and you're getting all the answers that you really want to hear, I don't know if you surrounded yourself with the right people. That people need to be challenging you. So I don't know if I answered the question, on the scale. Most of the ones that were really good interviews were very humble people. They were able to laugh at themselves. And I wasn't surprised at their success.
Yeah, it's, I call it, I love, there's not one on-ramp to humility, but it's always interesting to see the on-ramps to humility and to be in that position where you can laugh at yourself, where you can take the lowest seat, be willing to admit, I don't know, or to say, I'm sorry. They're always, and often the on-ramp, as I noted before, is some level of pain that they've experienced, existential pain, physical pain, whatever it might be, that there's this wake up to, okay, I need to be, there's a different way.
I think especially to have this huge purpose, they need to have a self-awareness. We can look at certain political leaders today, or in the recent past, that they didn't have that self-awareness. They weren't willing to challenge themselves and think, could there be a better way? My way is the right way, and so forth. I'm having a senior moment.
No problem. Yeah, it's, I think we're just really keying in on this notion of what makes a great leader. And I love the little vignette that you shared that your wife noted, that something's small, and you mentioned earlier the investment, whether 50% is the right amount of time or not, but in that ballpark of investing in themselves, investing in improving themselves, investing in little things like knowing people's names and remembering details of past conversations.
But it can't be a checkbox exercise. Okay, I got this reminder that came up. I'm sending out the auto happy birthday email to him, her, he, she, however, and then it's wrong, so you get the gender wrong just because you were in a hurry and you copy and pasted or whatever. It has to be authentic. These leaders really need to be themselves. And that seems probably one of their biggest challenges. When you talk about what gets in the way of leaders being successful, I think one, it's not being able to humble themselves. Two, probably they need to trust their judgment and or counsel, because a lot of times you get these communication departments that, okay, stay on message. Here's what you want to cover. And they just sound like a robot. They don't sound like a person. So we talked about they need to be humble. They need to have good advisors and be willing to listen to them. They need to be willing to take action. They need to get close to their employees. In fact, I would argue that any CEO that's at a company that's 100 or less should be involved in every interview. You want to set the culture. Number one, the culture comes from the leader. That's it. So if the leader's a jerk, you're probably going to have a jerk culture. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to work in that kind of culture now that I have more options. But if the leader inspires you to want to run through a brick wall, that's the kind of company you want to work for. And it doesn't matter if they're selling shoes like Zappos. I mean, they created this incredible culture, to make a difference. So it doesn't have to be in the life sciences, but it definitely starts with the leader. The leader sets the tone, and they have to be living these values of honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, transparency. They can't be the one closing the bar drunk, right? And that needs to trickle down. Neither can the district manager, who is, for that sales rep, that's the person who sets the culture of that team. So, it's really setting yourself to a higher standard. It's definitely required. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard if you want to be called a leader. Vladimir Putin is not a leader. He's just in charge of this thing, but he is not, by my definition, a leader.
And a lot of the conversations I have with CEOs, and I try not to have too many of these, but I do have some colleagues and friends who I have to try to convince that values and culture are important. And I had a conversation with a CEO recently, and he believes in this stuff to a degree, but he said to me, Jeff, you have to show me the measures. You have to be able to measure this. I have to be able to sell that we're going to invest this money in. We have to convince my board that this is important. And so what have you noticed? You've pointed to successful leaders. What have you noticed as the correlation between someone who really gets culture, makes an investment in culture, and the results of the business?
Well, I didn't sit down and, look through a bunch of corporate prospectuses beforehand and
yeah, sure,
and everything like that to look at certain measures. But intuitively, we know that people usually aren't leaving companies, that they like working at, where they enjoy what they are doing. So if they are leaving, it could be for money. It could be to follow another, their significant other's career. But, odds are it's management, And so the leader has to be, when you see high turnover at your organization, the buck stops with the leader. Again, the original question was,
just what have you noticed? And again, it is anecdotal because we're not poring over prospectuses and annual reports. It's just anecdotally the corollary between those leaders who invest deeply in the culture, the values of the organization, and their results in the marketplace. I mean, I know what I've seen and what I can point to, and I'm just curious from your seat, observing, interviewing, talking with leaders, what do you see as that relationship?
It's strong. I mean, even the leaders that I know who quote failed, the molecule didn't make it or anything like that. The ones that stuck to their guns and they bounce back on their feet. They get other opportunities, I just know that those executives that are focused on integrity and honesty and transparency, and then you meet people that report to them, that really like this person, and the CEO say, I'm maybe a bit of an evangelical type executive, and I make no apologies for it, because if that's them being authentic, you'd much rather that than somebody where you never really know where you stand because they're a bit of this chameleon. So I think the culture is hugely important. It's the number one driver. It's going to be the number one differentiator. I mean, everybody can match everybody else's benefits down to pet insurance or whatever, they're like frequent flyer miles. But if you can come up with that purpose that people can really get behind, and you can communicate it such that the custodian knows that they are so important to this organization, because if the organization isn't clean, and we're trying to run these really difficult clinical trials for a product or whatever, the organization needs to run like a well-oiled machine, top to bottom, including the custodian staff. They play an important role, and a CEO that can get everybody behind that, and then provide them with good benefits and make it financially rewarding and fun. Sign me up. The leader needs to be thinking about this, I think, when they are first starting the company. What kind of company do I want to work at? Do I want to work at a company where I can't wait to get to work? Or do I want to work in a place where each day I'm coming in 8:05, 8:07? So I know you've interviewed other people. I think Francois Nader, I think his comment was culture is the single most important thing. And I would say that is true. And then if you can create the purpose that feeds that culture, and then you can bring in the people that have that work ethic to feed that culture. I was thinking, you want to find good people to hire that have a high work ethic, you should be interviewing their spouse or their significant other over dinner. And they start telling you stories about, oh yeah, over the weekend, they typically do this or do that. And they have these hobbies that, are challenging. Those are people that probably are going to work pretty hard, especially if you give them a purpose they can get behind.
I love that 3-part, and I know you didn't say it as formulaic, but purpose, culture, and people. Strong people with a work ethic, smart. I love the combination of those three. It's really, really well said.
Well, and then it goes to the leader, and the leader being open to being coached, to being managed up to listening. I remember, and so can I share an anecdote?
Of course.
Okay. So I remember I had been invited to interview executives on camera for an organization at a big event, an annual event. And so I was going to be interviewing all these different CEOs. And so the organizer set up all these pre-calls with all these CEOs. So, we could be like, hey, what are we going to talk about? What does your company do? Help me understand that. So I'm going to ask you 3 different questions, because we need to come up with less than 5 minutes of something that people can understand what your company does. And so I did that with all of them. And most of those recordings, show up. Okay, let's check the lighting, got this. Okay, we got to get them wired up and so forth. Beginning to end would take 15 minutes, Now, the one person that I had this conversation with, on the phone, hey, I'm like, listen, what do you want? Look, I'm much better at winging it. Okay, so you want to wing it. Okay. Well, so we didn't have the pre-call because he wanted to wing it. And so when we showed up, we tried his way of winging it. It took a half an hour. It took 5 takes. It was a disaster. So I share this because a CEO shouldn't be winging it. They should be open to the feedback that look, this isn't my first rodeo of doing this. I'm trying to tell you how to do it and do it well. You're telling me you like winging it. I know it's not going to work. And I know discussing that with them at that point, they weren't open to hearing that message.
Mm.
The CEO always needs to be open to hearing that message, especially the ones they don't want to hear.
Mm. Yeah, so good. Yeah, there's so many directions we could go with that. But I want to loop back on culture, because we're in a really interesting time coming out of 2.5 years of upheaval with COVID, and the landscape of work has changed. And as it relates to, and not the details of, like you said, whether they do pet insurance or not, or whether you allow 3 days of work for home, but what are those fundamental things of the work environment, and how companies are working with their people? What are some of those fundamental things that you are seeing we need to have different types of conversations about?
Well, so again, being retired, I have been out of the office for a while, and I will just draw a bit on my experience of having been in that office and gone through the process of, hey, everybody's working remote, to, hey, we're back in the office, to more of a hybrid approach. And my former company definitely would prefer having, I think, everybody in the office. That would probably be the best way for them to get the culture across, create a team environment. It's probably easier in person and so forth. But the reality is, in today's hiring environment, you're just not going to be able to win. So it's a very challenging environment of trying to get people to know one another. And so it really comes down to the caliber of people that you hire. If you hire somebody that works remote, then you need to be able to come up with ways to engage them, to keep them engaged, I think companies aren't talking about enough personal development. What are they doing to develop their employees who are especially working remote, who may eventually feel like, I feel like I'm on a bit of an island here. What are I'm sure people have probably had enough of some of the Zoom cocktail parties or whatever, but you got to keep thinking of different things, different ways, trying different things. But the best way to do that is asking your employees, what can I do to get you to engage in an after hours activity? What would that involve? And you need to get that feedback without you having the agenda of, like, I really want to do a Habitat for Humanity build, right? You need to be open to hearing that maybe that's not what your employees want to do. They want to do something else that's still powerful and meaningful and helps create that culture that you're looking for.
Yeah, it feels like there's a shift, and I don't want to use the word power, but a centricity. It feels like, we have the customer-centric mindset. The client's always right, customer's always right. There's the organization-centric view. And it feels like there's a shift happening to be employed, the power, I'll just use that word, the power shift, the focus shift to the employee. And conversations that seem to be appropriate is, like you talked about, development, personal development, career development, leader development, conversations about burnout, and about, should we be thinking about sabbaticals in a different way? So that's what it's from my observation tower. Feels like that's part of the shift that's happening as well.
I remember talking to an executive once at a conference, and he was talking about, like, we were talking about Europeans, and Europeans refer to vacation as holiday, going on holiday. And I said, they take a lot of holidays. And, sometimes they seem to take them like 2 weeks at a clip or something like that. And this executive said to me, could you imagine? He goes, could you imagine them, 1 week out of the office vacation where you start to maybe kind of unplug, 2 weeks, you kind of unplug, 3 weeks, you're probably looking at significant mental health improvement in your employees, but taking 3 weeks at a time, that's really difficult for companies to be able to manage. So, you can look at the steel industry as these examples of companies that, these unions had great benefits, but you had to hire so many other people to cover all those vacations and time out that eventually it just became not sustainable. So it's figuring out how to make those sustainable, or coming up with ways to have sabbaticals that people enjoy. I always thought it would be interesting. For example, the FDA has this huge, void of vacancies for positions where they need people. And I thought, the industry should come up with a way to say, hey, why don't we give a 6-month sabbatical where this person is kind of implanted in the FDA as, almost as an intern, but they're such a high level person that it's a win-win. They get exposed to understanding the process. They can bring that knowledge back into their organization. They help the FDA through, the company covers their salary while they're there or something like that. Those are some of the things that I thought could be an interesting way to do it. But most of the people that can afford to take a sabbatical probably give themselves a sabbatical, I would imagine, at a certain point in their career. So yeah, I think they need to think differently about the benefits, and it's not just healthcare. It's not just the 401k plan.
Yeah, I said to someone the other day that employees, the people that work for you, spend 50% or more of their waking hours in the place where that you are shepherding them, you're leading them, and the possibilities that exist, both detrimental and positive, depending on how that experience is so massive. The opportunity to have a deep impact on that person's world, on their life, on their health, is really extraordinary. And I don't think organizations, some do, but I don't think many organizations really understand the opportunity that they have to impact those folks' lives, and then thereby, as you said, when they're happy, when they're fulfilled, when they're healthy, the contribution then is reciprocal back to the organization. And I just don't think there's that as clear a connection as there could be with that. What do you think?
I'm trying to think this through. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking about this, about how many times I traveled and was in a cramped airplane and an overstuffed airport, eating crap, or whatever, and delivering on, you do all these different things to do your job. And it's a sacrifice, and I think a leader that takes the time to, hey man, listen, I know you put in a rough trip, the red eye was delayed or whatever. Hey, got you a gift card. You should have a nice dinner with your spouse or something like those little things. It's $100 gift card, but that just taking the time to recognize that, yes, they were away and they traveled and maybe they stayed in a nice place and maybe they got to eat a good meal, but they were away from their family, probably significant kid events. I don't know how many of my son's different athletic events or my other child's various band competitions I missed. I made plenty of them. But, these executives, they're traveling all over. It's a huge, huge sacrifice. Got to pay attention to those little things. And it can't be just, oh, I gave everybody a gift card. Maybe put a little thought behind that, that this person's a little bit different about this. When we talk about culture, so, a lot of people, I don't know if, I'm certainly no expert on it. And, but if you want, I've gone through 3 companies that made an active attempt to change the corporate culture. So I went through 3 of them. And actually, my former employer is, I think, really come a very long, positive way. Certainly not fast enough for me, but still, they've come a tremendous way. But I think, again, it becomes like that, educate yourself. So there's a book that I remember I was given a talk about corporate culture once, and it's called Quiet. It's by Susan Cain. This one, and if somebody's thinking about how to build that corporate culture, this one and, the corporate culture blueprint, those are 2 good resources to get started. But what I like about Quiet is so many times these gregarious, charismatic leaders, they're larger than life. They need to recognize the power of the introverts that they have on their team. Sometimes these people don't say too much because that's just the way they're wired, but they have these great ideas. You're going to lose the opportunity to mine those ideas if you don't figure out how to best engage with them, such that it isn't you're putting them in an uncomfortable position. Hey, come on up in front of the room and tell us what you did. That's their worst nightmare. So, how can you get them to want to do that? To see it as an opportunity. It requires coaching. It requires wanting to develop this person. Say, look, I know this is one of your biggest fears, but I did it too. I hate public speaking, being humble, taking an active role in it.
Yeah, it's this culture. I think you're also been talking about at different points is attention to detail, and not attention to detail is every I dotted and T crossed in a document, but attention to detail as it relates to your people, and I think you're continually pointing to that type of mindset. That type of mindset as you're building a company, and I love what you said earlier, Rob, that you may not have it all fully fleshed out, but that you have a vision for this from the very start. And again, we put so much emphasis on strategy. We put so much emphasis on funding. Again, all important, but I think we're shining a light in this conversation on putting an equal amount of attention on the tone that you set, and which thereby becomes the culture of that organization as it grows and becomes more than just a handful of people. I think that's what I'm taking out of this conversation that I'm really appreciating.
Well, and I think back to executives that I interviewed that they had a molecule, and it didn't work out. Well, the company is still around, because they pivoted. One company, I remember it was a medical device company, and it just, they were having these different challenges. We need to pivot it, and if you've hired really, really good people, you can probably do that. But if you've been focused too much on the funding, the financing, and just the molecule of itself, and not hiring people who are, how are they going to handle failure? How are they going to deal with these setbacks? The company it'll come and go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would imagine, Rob, you and I could probably talk for a very long time on any number of these subjects. But we're going to wrap up here with the final question that we ask almost every leader. And I'm going to put a little different twist on it, just given your unique seat of having talked to a lot of CEOs over the years, and that if an emerging leader came to you, and I have a sense of where you're going to go with this, given the rest of our conversation. But if an emerging leader came to you who was on a track to executive leadership, what would be those few pieces of advice that you would give him?
Um,
Or her.
You know,
I should not be gender specific.
right,
what would be that advice that you would give him or her?
right. Well, you need to live those values. You can't say we need to be honest and integrity and trustworthy and then tell the stock person to post date some invoices or something so it looks like they were shipped out on. You have to play the cards that you are dealt with. You have to listen to, when you become the CEO, you should be listening to your employees so much more so you can have a pulse on things. Because if you're just taking everything that you are hearing from your executive leadership team without trust but verify, people like to say, right? Trust in your team that they're giving you good information, but still, by the time you hear it from them, it may be slightly differentiated from what was first gathered from maybe the floor. I'd say listen to your people. You cannot over communicate the vision, enough. You need to simplify that, and you should be working on your personal development all the time. If you are hiring people and you are saying, listen, we're an organization that strives for continuous improvement, and you as a leader are not striving to continuously improve by reading and viewing and engaging and challenging yourself. I don't care if you got a Harvard MBA. Harvard MBA would know they should be reading these things, books about leadership and learning more. Yeah. Always be reading, always be learning, always be open to feedback, especially stuff that you sometimes don't want to hear. I don't know. I guess one would be, you should be treating people like every day is your last day on earth. If you were a lot kinder to people and you take the time to get to know people, you'll have a much better journey, I would think, much better success.
Those are great piece of advice. Awesome piece of advice. Rob, this has been a lot of fun. I just love your candor. I love just you're willing to play, and really valuable stuff here for the most experienced leaders. And as we just couched it with those emerging leaders. So many thanks. We will put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So if people want to look you up, they can find you. And we'll also note those 2 books.
Here's another one you can note. So this guy actually, he wrote a leadership lessons for life science leader, and he sent me a copy of his book, Joe Trammell. And it's called The CEO Tightrope. And I've read a lot of books about leadership, but if somebody is looking for kind of a CEO type handbook, I would recommend it.
Awesome. Awesome. Great suggestions. Much appreciated, Rob. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.